Quotations from myself, segment 64, quotation number 823. All the miracles of the universe were not sufficient enough to convince me of the existing of the Supreme Power until I began to discern the certain pattern in my infinitesimally insignificant life, the pattern which wouldn't make any sense unless I accept the existence of Providence. For though life has tried me mercilessly by fire and water almost from the start, and I am afraid isn't through with me yet, it has eventually, by effectively blocking all other possibilities, brought me where I wanted to be in the first place, to philosophy and writing. And though I have dreamed about being both a philosopher and a writer since my early adolescence, I now realize that without this kind of life I would have had nothing of any importance to think of or to write about. Number 824. There is no doubt that one seeking help, especially of the emotional and psychological kind, is in need, first of all, of being listened to. But listening in itself isn't very helpful unless the listeners can relate to what the speaker tells them and respond by sharing their own similar experiences and how they dealt with them. Unfortunately, it is not always the case, for no matter how sympathetic the listeners are, it isn't easy to relate to somebody else's particular problems. Yet, feeling obligated, if only out of compassion, to react in some fashion, like a doctor who, though unable to correctly diagnose the illness, writes a prescription anyway, they would try to offer some advice. At this point, the seeker can either simply disregard the advice prescription as irrelevant to his particular situation, but at the same time be appreciative of the other's willingness to listen and to help the best way they can, or to interpret the useless and therefore unsolicited advice as a sign of not being listened to, ignored, and rejected. It is perfectly clear that the first type of reaction is vastly preferable to the second one. For getting angry with those who are, though unable, yet willing to help, will brand the seeker as being ungrateful, and the next time he seeks help, it will be given only reluctantly or not at all. On the other hand, expressing gratitude, even if only for a willingness to listen and to help, will keep the door open, and when the seekers knock on it again, the welcome and desire to help will be even more generous and perhaps more efficacious. One should always remember the saying, "Don't foul the well you might need to drink from again." Number 825. To those poets who lament the meagerness of their output, my advice would be to follow the example of Gertrude Stein by repeating each word several times, and you can easily double or triple it. 826. Given a choice between myth and reality, people inevitably choose myth. That's why the adopted children, no matter how loving their adoptive parents are, always long for the natural ones. And so are the children and grandchildren of immigrants who dream about the country of their ancestors, no matter how good their life in the new land is. 827. Personally, I was surprised to hear the other day the Japanese mafia was doing the better job at helping the victims of earthquake in Kobe than the Japanese government. After all, the mafia specializes in organized crime, while the government usually presents us with a disorganized version thereof. 827. Forgive them who once defeated you the sins of their victory. 829. Though it is pleasant and gratifying to talk to the people who share our conviction and sentiments and thus always agree with us, yet to learn something new, one should occasionally converse with those holding the opposite to his opinion. 830. Whether one truly and deeply believes in what one claims to believe in or not, as long as he strongly and sincerely believes in his believing, it should suffice, and maybe all man is capable of. 831. Some people seem to be born already possessing the natural goodness. Yet even in them it isn't enough, for due to the human imperfections, one isn't always the best judge of one's own thoughts and action. Therefore, one needs the objective standard of the absolute perfection to measure oneself up against, similar to the way all weights in the world are measured against the international standard of weight, the standard kilogram, kept in a vault in Paris, and to strive to emulate it as close as possible. Thus, the Christian who profess Christ to be such a standard of the absolute perfection should always measure their lives against it. 832. If one has a natural ability to think clearly and articulate the thoughts lucidly, should one suppress and conceal it in the presence of other men, so not to incur their displeasure or even hate, because they might feel less in doubt in this aspect than he is? Some people are given a gift of a beautiful voice, others an ability to play and compose music, still others to paint or to dance, and to do it much better than the rest of us. And yet we are able to enjoy these special talents without lamenting our deficiency in such areas. So why one's clear thinking and lucid articulation in the presence of the others provoke so much jealousy and hostility on their part? Is it because we think that these particular qualities all men have to possess in equal measure, and none should be better at it than anybody else? I firmly believe that if the ability to think and to express one's thoughts were not commonly considered as a simply essential human attributes, but also as a special talents, then perhaps it would be acceptable to allow them, as to other talents of men, the different degree of perfection. As of now, regrettably, a prophet still is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. 833. The people with drastically different life history can nevertheless suffer from the same psychological malady, depression, but yet for strikingly opposite reasons. The so-called underachievers get depressed because they have never accomplished anything of significance in the past and finally realize that the future isn't going to be any different. The superachiever gets depressed on the contrary after having accomplished just about everything they had intended to, and eventually coming to the point in their lives where they know there is nothing else they can do, or more important, want to do. The former are suffering from the unappeasable hunger, the latter from excessive fullness. Age 35. It must be true that happy childhood is a worse preparation from being a writer. For in order to write well, one has first to learn a lot about people one he is going to write about. Yet, bearing in mind that our learning, especially in the early stage of life, is mostly of a defensive kind, one learns about others as much as needed to protect oneself from them. The sheltered childhood, fortunately for a child, but unfortunately for a future writer, is understandably rather limited in such learning opportunities. Luckily, quote unquote, for me, by being chronically ill and by being a Jew, another incurable ailment, this impediment of the happy childhood has been for most part removed. I seldom have any illusion about people around me, but at the same time, having suffered myself, I feel compassion toward everyone, no matter how despicable the person might be. Age 36. In the final analysis, after all has been said and done, no matter how realistic one is, one still cannot completely accept the reality. Age 37. Why is it that in today's poetry the choice so often has to be made between the platitudes and emptitudes? Age 38. I am fully aware, at least of two of my gifts or courses, authenticity and sincerity. And the reason I am so sure about it is that every phony hypocrite I have ever met could not stomach me, as if I was a walking accusation of what he is. Age 39. To those who claim that high minimum wages are destroying our competitive position in the global market, I have a question. How come Canadian or American economy can't afford paying its worker $5 or $7 an hour, while paying doctors, lawyers, and dentists $300 or $500 an hour, or even more?